All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Shanon. Joining me, as always, is my buddy Mark.
Hello.
As you probably have guessed by the just the opening number there right before I jumped on, Betsy Palmer passed away a little bit over a week ago from us recording this at the ripe old age of 88. We're not going to do the entire episode on Betsy Palmer, but we wanted to spend a few minutes of the episode, pay a little bit of tribute to her. She is one of the actresses out there that if you're a horror fan and you're a fan of the slasher boom of the late 70s and 80s, then you probably feel the same as we do, that she's kind of your surrogate mother in a way.
Yeah, she is, isn't she? Yeah, she's pretty important to, especially I think you and I's generation grew up with the 70s and 80s horror films. Come on, Jason Voorhees' mother. Can you think of a more important matriarch than that in the whole horror genre?
No, outside of Norman Bates, I was trying to think of this the other day. I don't think that we were ever really introduced to the mother character of the star of a series.
No, we weren't. Yeah, she was very important in creating the whole mythology behind, the Jason character in the Friday the 13th movies. I remember still the first time. See, when I saw the first one, it was probably in like the mid to late 80s. So Jason and the hockey mask were already like the big deal. So I had no idea when I saw that first one that it wasn't going to be Jason at the end. So when it would turn out to be, this old woman in a sweater, completely, was a surprise to me. And I was even a bigger surprise that we didn't get the hockey mask till part 3. But yeah, I remember that first time I saw it, that, I was like, oh, okay, so his mom's involved. And she was great. And, the funny thing about that movie is she was like only in it for like, 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, she wasn't in it for very long. I think she only filmed for like a week or a little over a week. In the clip, I know she said that when she originally signed up for it, it was 10 days. And I think that's pretty close as to what she was in it for. And, I mean, famously, as she even said in that clip that we just heard, she didn't want to do it. She thought that Friday the 13th was going to be a big piece of shit. After it was made, she thought it was a big piece of shit. When she saw it, she thought it was a big piece of shit. And it wasn't until years and years later when she finally realized that she had this huge following because of the horror community, then did she really start to embrace that movie. And I don't know if her original feelings of it being a giant piece of shit ever actually changed. I just know that, in her later years that she was appreciative of the fans and she was appreciative of the horror community. I don't know how many conventions that she did, but I do know that she did make some appearances at a few anyway.
After all these years, I still have no idea what other movie she's been in. So I only know her as Jason's mom. I have never, I'm sure she's probably got this huge career, that was way before this and maybe after it even to some degree. And I have no clue of what any of that would have been.
No, neither do I. I know she was like a movie star like back in the 50s, but I don't know if I've ever seen any of the stuff that she was in. I know one of her later claims to fame before the Friday the 13th movie was she was a regular panelist on this game show called I've Got a Secret.
Oh, okay.
So I have no idea what that show was. I don't know if it's like the Hollywood Squares of the 80s and 90s to where, that's where all the washed up stars from Hollywood end up on. I don't know, but
yeah, I think and also she was in technically she was in part 2 as well. Friday the 13th part 2. They had the flashback at the beginning of 2 with the last few scenes of the first one that she was in. But then also in part 2, she came back to do the end scene where where the final girl is like pretending to be the mother, and then Jason sees her as the mother. So they actually have Betsy Palmer do a few lines, and so that's kind of neat. So she's in part 2, and a rubber severed head of hers is in the refrigerator of part 2 as well.
Yeah, and I tried to remember too the other day doing a little bit of prep for this. if when she did that in part 2, I think when she came back and filmed those shots for part 2, I think it was only a day or maybe a couple of days. And if I remember right, too, she had said when they filmed part 2 that she refused to do it. She refused to do it. And then she asked for some astronomical amount of money for the amount of work that they were asking her to do. And like they agreed to it. And she's like, okay.
Funny. Yeah, she did a good job in that too. She had that just kind of that motherly type of personality, the way that she carried herself in those films, even just in the little brief part in the second one. We lost another one. Such a shame.
Yep. So rest in peace, Pamela Voorhees. You will be greatly missed. All right, so let's get to the meat and potatoes of this episode. As we promised during the last episode, which was a few weeks ago already, so hopefully if you listen to the Wolf Cop episode, you remember we said we're going to talk about John Carpenter. If you didn't listen to the Wolf Cop episode yet, be sure to go back and tune into it, because I think that might be my favorite movie of the year. But anyway, on to John Carpenter, the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who brought us Halloween.
The genius.
The guy who brought us the remake of The Thing.
The Fog.
The Fog.
Gave us that. Big Trouble in Little China.
So in preparation for this episode, I went back over the past month or so, because me and Mark had talked about doing this a while ago. So I started going through and watching some of the movies that I hadn't seen in a while. And then some of the movies I have never seen. And then a couple of the movies that I had seen before. I mean, I watched Assault on Precinct 13. I watched Halloween. I watched The Fog. I didn't watch The Thing. I watched Big Trouble in Little China. Tried to watch Ghosts of Mars. The Village of the Damned. Watched that one. In the Mouth of Madness. They Live. That was the first time I ever saw that one. Watched Prince of Darkness. Pretty much I've seen all of John Carpenter's movies in the past month, except for 2. That one was Vampires. I saw that one. I've seen that one a bunch of times. I like that movie. The Ward, which was his last one, which I watched not too long ago. 2 of his movies that I couldn't seem to find anywhere was Memoirs of an Invisible Man from 1992, and then his actual first full-length movie, Dark Star, from the early 70s. He had great movies in there, like we had said. Halloween, which I think the 2 of us would agree is by far his best movie ever.
Oh, man, I couldn't agree with you more.
And I think a lot of people would consider that, if not the greatest horror movie of all time, even though it wasn't technically the first slasher movie, it is the grandfather of slasher movies.
Halloween, to me, is the first movie I ever saw from John Carpenter. I saw it when I was very, very young, and it had a huge impact on me. And to this day, it's still like one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, every year I watch it. And to be honest with you, I can't think of another movie I watch on a yearly basis. I guess Halloween's probably my favorite movie. The sheer genius of that film to me, and the brilliance of John Carpenter, and he is all over that film. I mean, it's not like he was just like one. He directed the film, he wrote the film, he scored the film. You know, his ideas, everything about the movie. I mean, that's Carpenter. That's his handiwork right there. It's a masterpiece. It really is. It's a modern day masterpiece. It's just as brilliant as, you know, any of your classic films of. I think personally, I think it's right up there with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I really do. I mean, it's just so brilliantly done. I mean, and the fact that he did it in such a short amount of time with such a little bit of amount of money, you know, and that he was able to put it all together like that. I mean, to me, that's talent. You know, the guy had a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources, you know, was given an assignment, and he didn't think of anything of the movie. He had no idea it was going to carry on so long. It was just another movie to him, just another, you know, job. You know, here we are talking about it, and they're on so many sequels and remakes, and every year you can watch this movie and people still are talking about this movie. That's a sign that you know that you've got something classic on your hands.
Halloween came out in 78, was pure genius, like you just said. And then he went on and made a couple of TV TV movies after that. And then he made The Fog, which is actually, again, a pretty good movie. Very suspenseful, very, very well done, for the time. I mean, that one was done I think that one came out in 1980. And then he did Escape from New York, which at the time was probably a really great movie, was probably really well done. When you see a movie like that now, it's a little dated. The special effects that were in it, that kind of stuff, doesn't really hold up anymore. It's not like because if you watch, for example, Star Wars, which came out in the 70s, if you still watch the original Star Wars today, like some of those effects, you're like, whoa, how did they do that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
that movie really holds up.
Escape from New York was, the storyline for that movie is good, and the idea behind it was good, but the movie itself just doesn't hold up today. And then the next one after that was The Thing, which, again, The Thing, kind of along the same lines as Halloween, is a great movie, brilliantly done, even though it's technically a remake, even though if you listen to certain people talk about The Thing, some people claim that it's not a remake. Other people claim that it is a remake. There was a movie in the 50s, and the argument that I've heard people try to make is that John Carpenter's The Thing isn't based off of the 1950s movie, but it is based off of the same source material. I don't know. Either way, it can or can't be a sequel, I guess, or not a sequel, but a remake, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, I know that was Howard Hawks, the guy who did the original The Thing from Another World. He was a big fan of Howard Hawks. I know that. He talks about that in all his interviews. And actually, if you watch Halloween, the movie that the kids are watching that Laurie's babysitting is the Thing from Another World. And I know that his remake, yeah, I think you're right. I think it was like sort of a different adaptation of the source material. That movie, to me, that's funny because that's like another one of those big ones that everybody thinks of when they think of John Carpenter. They think of Halloween and they think of The Thing. The Thing, I remember seeing it, like, I think we rented it back in like the 80s when I was a kid, and I didn't really care much about it. It sort of kind of built up this following over the years, and then I'm sort of kind of a newbie to this film because I think I saw it before all the way through way back when, but I never really wasn't anything special to me at the time. And so in the last few years, I've kind of revisited it after they did another follow-up or remake or prequel or whatever it is recently. And I appreciate it now. It's not one of my favorite films, and certainly for its time, with the special effects and everything and all the practical effects and the latex and the rubber and all that stuff. I think they did a really good job with it. So I can see why it's got such a following now. But yeah, back in the day, I wasn't a huge fan. When I look at it, listen to a Carpenter interview, and especially in the last few years, I sense like he's kind of coming around to what he is and what he's going to be known for now that he's kind of in his twilight years. Because I know that I don't think he ever wanted to be known for Halloween and for some of these movies that he's done. I don't think he ever wanted to be like a horror guy. He just kind of got placed in there because of Halloween and the success. He tried to do some other things, and he really didn't have enough commercial success to catapult his career to the next level. So he's always been kind of like this guy who's associated with late 70s, early 80s horror movies, science fiction movies, like with The Thing. And I think like that kind of pisses him off a little bit because he doesn't really want to be that. I think he wanted to be like, I know he always talks about like he'd want to do a Western, and I think he wanted to be like more of a, like kind of more of a mainstream director instead of so much stuck in the genre. But it just never happened for him. But now I think with all these conventions, he's found his home, like where his true fan base is, and people like you and me who, would go and get his autograph and all that stuff. And I think he's finally kind of coming around to that reality that, hey man, this is what you're going to be known for. This is what you contributed to film. Because I know like he always gets ticked off, it seems like, every time he has to talk about Halloween. I think to him that was probably like, he was young. It was like his second full length movie, I believe. To him, that's like, wow, I was just a kid, and they told me to go do this, and I did it. It's just a movie. It's not that big a deal. You know, I didn't even have enough money to do what I really wanted to do with it. So I think he's kind of stuck in that, you know, typecast position of horror director.
A couple of things too. If you watch some of his other movies, Assault on Precinct 13, even They Live, Escape from New York, and then later on Escape from L.A. He's got a lot of very political undertones to those movies, where they're very anti-establishment. Really is truly what they are. You know, in They Live, I don't know when the last time it was you saw that movie, but there is the aliens are controlling everything, and the aliens are pretty much essentially programmed to obey and to follow orders, and if the humans step out of line, then the humans have to be punished, is pretty much the feel of that movie. And kind of with Escape from New York and Escape from L.A., you know, the whole premise of those movies is the United States is essentially a military state, and they just sectioned off this one area, and if you break the law, they just dump you there, and they don't give a shit about you. And
yeah, Escape from New York. I just saw that this past year for the first time. I never saw that movie, and that was one that was always kind of rattling around. I knew I had to pick that one up. I put on my 11 to 12-year-old glasses when I watched it and tried to put myself in that mindset, because I was a big Rambo fan in the 80s. I was a huge Sylvester Stallone fan. So I kind of pictured it like, you know, Kurt Russell's like the lone hero, you know, the muscle-bound hero who goes in and has to go on this mission and you know, save the president. And it just kind of had that same kind of Rambo feel to me. And I enjoyed it for what it was. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of that film. They Live, the other one you mentioned, now that movie I hated when I first saw it, because again, I was a horror fan ever since I was really, really little. Halloween being, you know, absolute favorite horror movie of all time. So I was like, oh, John Carpenter's next movie, and I watched it. I'm like, what? You know, like aliens and glasses that make you see things, and it's just ridiculous. But now I love that film. I think that's just a great film. I even like kind of the hokey cheesiness of it, especially that 30-minute fight they have in the middle, like where you have all the fake punching sounds and stuff. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh yeah, the lovely fight where they beat the shit out of each other, and then neither one of them wins, and they're all like, "Oh, all right, buddy, it's okay. Let's go get a beer."
That's the one. Yeah, and that's another one of those where it has kind of like he cast Rowdy Roddy Piper, the wrestler, as the main star of that film, and it was another kind of like the '80s macho, muscle-bound hero of the day. He's going to go and save the world kind of thing. And so, you know, that's a cool one. Probably of the ones you mentioned so far, the one that I do watch pretty regularly now, just because going back to the horror films, I always watch Halloween, but I also have sort of a thing for The Fog. Now, I don't think it's a really great movie, but it's certainly a Carpenter movie, and I think he didn't even really. It was actually that movie. On the special features on the DVD, he talks a lot about how they filmed that movie, and when they watched it, he realized it wasn't scary enough, so he had to go back and add stuff. And you can kind of see that, like all of a sudden there's sort of like gore scenes that seem kind of out of place with the rest of the movie. And he kind of tossed that in there because like the 80s were pretty much known for horror turning into gore films. And Carpenter's, you know, his talent is more with suspense and all of that. And he seems like he kind of, when he adds gore and he doesn't seem to do it exactly. I mean, The Thing, he did a good job with it, but early on, like with some of his horror stuff, it seemed like he kind of forced the gore a little bit, where it didn't seem as natural. Like in The Fog, like the killing seemed like kind of like he's trying to show you, okay, here's the knife is going in this guy, because that's what you want to see, right? Because it's the 80s. Where in Halloween, he did it in a very suspenseful way, where it's more shadows and kind of creepy stuff. And I think that's what he's really known for.
Aside from directing his movies, we already alluded to it a little bit, but he is also known for scoring pretty much everything he's ever made. I think everything except for maybe 2 of the movies that he directed, he's scored. And if you ever watch any of them, I mean, you can pretty much pick up on it right away, because they all kind of have that very similar sound to them.
Yes, they do.
Which, I mean, you could take, aside from Halloween, which has the most identifiable theme music probably of any horror movie. You could take the score from any of his movies and kind of transpose them to another movie, and it would probably fit right in, really.
Yeah, he definitely has a kind of a familiar sound in all of those films. But I just his scoring, the Halloween theme is just, I mean, that's such a memorable theme now. It's like kind of like the horror theme. Like everybody knows that. So the guy really is. I mean, I think he really is a talented, brilliant filmmaker, mainly because of Halloween. I find it interesting. It's kind of funny because like I look at all the list of films, that he's done. I think the thing with directors and writers and movie guys is they kind of have their moments, and then they sort of their points where they could. This is where there was greatness there, and then they kind of ride the wave of that greatness. And I really do think Halloween was the peak of his career, and he kind of peaked early. Because everything else, there's some good moments in there, like Big Trouble in Little China. We didn't talk too much about that. That's a fun little 1986 film, It's well done little action film. Starman was pretty good, kind of more of a drama. Christine, another horror movie, and that was one of those movies where he was kind of riding on the wave of Halloween. And I think he even said once that the only reason he did that movie was because he needed a paycheck. And of course, you put John Carpenter on a horror movie and people are going to go see it. I really do think he peaked with Halloween.
Yeah, you mentioned Big Trouble in Little China there. That was the first one that I rewatched probably a month ago when I started doing this, because a lot of these are on Netflix or on Amazon. Hell, even anymore, there's a lot of times you can even just go onto YouTube, and there's full movies on YouTube all the time. Actually, YouTube is where I watched They Live. My oldest daughter, who is 14, I had kind of said, like, oh, you know what? I'm going to watch this Big Trouble in Little China. And this, like I said, this was probably a little bit over a month ago, or maybe even a little bit longer than that. Because when I first started watching it, or when I first decided to watch it, it wasn't that I was planning on watching a bunch of John Carpenter movies. I was just going to watch it because I remember being a kid and thinking that movie was really cool. And I probably hadn't seen it for 20 years. So we turned it on, and then, it starts off, and John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. Completely forgot about that. And she did not enjoy it at all.
Oh, really?
It's one of those things kind of like with Escape from New York and stuff, to where because I remember loving that movie when I was a kid, but like now it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's different watching it now, but you do have to kind of put your, get your mindset back to then. Don't kind of think of it as a kind of, contemporary film. You got to look back at that time and kind of have that sort of sense of, like childish sense, I guess, when you watch those movies. But that's one of those movies that I remember enjoying back when I was a kid too. It was like one of those. We were always watching it for whatever reason. It was on cable or whatever, and so it was just kind of like always in the background. Especially one particular summer, I remember always watching that stupid movie. And it was just kind of like a fun, entertaining, rainy day movie. Yeah, it's a fun one. Kind of the same sort of feel as Escape from New York, in my opinion.
One of the things with John Carpenter that we were just talking about, Halloween being kind of the peak of his career, even though it was his second or third movie that he ever had made. But John Carpenter is one of those guys to where it doesn't matter if it's just the two of us blabbing on about horror movies a couple times a month. If there's not every horror fan, but a lot of horror fans, when you talk about John Carpenter, they'll be like, oh my God, John Carpenter. And like years ago at Flashback in Chicago, he was the featured person that weekend. You had to have a special ticket to get an autograph from him, which I had. Walked over at one of the times where, when he was doing autographs, and the wait in the gold members line was like 2 hours. And I'm like,
oh man.
Nope, not going to do that.
Wow.
And then, and then I had heard from a couple of people too that he was not that he was mean to anybody, but he was just kind of like, okay, signature, thank you, have a good day. Signature, thank you, have a good day. So whereas the following year, Jamie Lee Curtis made her first and what they claim is going to be her only convention appearance at Whorehound Weekend. And she was taking the time and talking to everybody and personalizing every autograph and all this stuff. And oh, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I heard she was quite a treat to be around.
And then, but like I said too, later on in that day, during the panels and he was being interviewed, and then it was time to open up the questions to the attendees. Like we had said before, you have The Thing, which came out in the early 80s, which, depending on how you look at it, technically is a remake, or maybe it's not, depending on which side of the ball you want to take on that one. Because I've seen the original, The Thing from Another World, and there is a lot of similarities, but then again, they also are supposedly based off the same story. And then in the late 80s, he made another movie called The Village of the Damned, which was a remake. Then, as we all know, well, it's been more than 10 years ago now, but in the early 2000s, Rob Zombie remade Halloween, and that's always been one of those things where John Carpenter has never really came out and said that he enjoyed the movie or he didn't like the movie or he hated it or anything like that. The thing that you always hear people say, and I've heard John Carpenter say this and I've heard Rob Zombie say this both, is that when Rob Zombie decided that he was going to remake that movie, or when it came to be that he was going to remake that movie, that Zombie contacted Carpenter, and Carpenter said, "You have my blessing, make it your own movie." And then that's all that anybody will ever say about it. During the Q&A at Flashback Weekend a couple of years ago, there was two different people that tried to ask him about that, because he just wouldn't answer. What did you think about Zombie's movie? I'm not going to talk about it. And then somebody else was like, what did you think about the movie? I already said I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah, he's pretty tight-lipped about that. I get the sense that he wasn't quite impressed with it, the way he talked, because he won't say it, but I think he's doing it out of, I don't know, maybe some sort of filmmaker respect or whatever, and just the weight of his response is going to be pretty heavy on that film. But I have just kind of the sense that he wasn't quite impressed. But at the same time, he did tell him, make it your own. And in all honesty, that certainly is what Rob Zombie did. He totally made it his own thing, made it his own version of it. I mean, it's Zombie all over the place on that film. And yeah, he uses the Carpenter themes and stuff and some of the basic structure, but yeah, that is a Zombie movie.
Yeah, we talked about that last October when we did our Halloween franchise episode. I know me and you have different views on that movie, and like I said back then, and I still say it to this day, and I say this with all remakes, you have to go into the movie, kind of like what you were saying earlier with going in with okay, I'm gonna go in as my 12-year-old self to watch this movie. You have to go in with the remakes with the mindset that this is not the same movie that I love, or this is not the same movie that I used to watch all the time. This is its own movie, and I'm going to make my judgments on this movie, not based on the other movie.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, you do have to do that with that. The hard thing with Halloween to me is that is like probably my favorite movie. I don't know why I keep saying probably. I'm just going to say it is. It's definitely my favorite movie. And so it's hard to watch anything else and say, well, yeah, that's because it just nothing will stand up to it. Yeah, to me, Carpenter, for me, summing it all up with Carpenter, I would say, I think the man is a genius. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker, and I think the reason is because of Halloween.
Based off of one movie.
Yeah, I would have to say that. Based off of one movie. I probably, looking at, after it's interesting because we were talking about doing this for a while, this Carpenter episode. We were going to go through his movies and kind of talk about him as a filmmaker and all of that. I was like, oh, I'm all about Carpenter, all about, his films and everything. And I love Halloween. I like The Fog, They Live, Big Trouble, The Thing, all of those movies, I really do like. But after this episode, I'm going to say this. Am I a Carpenter fan? Yeah, I'm a Carpenter fan. I think he's got some good stuff in his repertoire of films here. But I am definitely a Halloween fan first. I think Halloween is so brilliant and so genius that Carpenter, being the guy that was pretty much responsible for the whole thing, wherever he messes up in his career, whenever he kind of falls a little bit, like, a good example would be that his most recent movie, The Ward, which I wasn't a big fan of, but it wasn't really his fault because he didn't write the film. I thought the story wasn't that good. His directing was fine, or even The Fog, which was just an average horror movie. Definitely a Carpenter film. Wherever he kind of falls a little bit, I'm going to say, just going back to Halloween, it's like, I forgive you. That's fine. You can mess up. You can do what you want. Make whatever film you want. And if it's crap, that's fine. As long as I'll always go back and say, well, yeah, you might have done this one, but hey, you got Halloween. As you wrote that, you directed it, you did the score for it. I forgive you. You're brilliant. You're a genius, and I'll leave it at that.
Just one other last point I wanted to make about Carpenter real quick before we wrap it up is in doing preparation for this movie, like I said, I went back and I rewatched a whole bunch of movies, and there was probably a handful of movies that I hadn't seen before that I did watch for the first time. The one thing that I did notice about his movies was when you're watching them, you'll notice that, for example, Kurt Russell was in Escape from New York, and then he was in The Thing, and then he was in Big Trouble in Little China, and then he was in Escape from L.A. And then John Carpenter actually did this made-for-TV movie before Escape from New York, where he worked with Kurt Russell in that, called Elvis. And then some of the other ones, like Jamie Lee Curtis was in Halloween. She was in The Fog. Tom Atkins was in The Fog and Escape from New York. And then there was a couple other, little lesser-known people that he had in, 6-7 movies of his. So he was very good to the people that he worked with. He would go back and he would work with some of the same people over and over and over again, which I always thought was kind of cool when people do that. All right, so thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.
See ya.